I rise to hope that my colleagues will not waive the Budget Act point of order on this bill, and I rise to speak against passing this bill. Madam President, I do think sometimes you have to talk about process when you are dealing with something as important and as big as the bill before us. And the process is not a process that would have allowed input from both Republicans and Democrats, that would have written a bill in a committee rather than trying to write the bill on the Senate floor. I still am very concerned about a $1 trillion expenditure. I think when you take an 800-page bill, 800 pages, it's about $1 billion a page that we are acting to spend of our taxpayer dollars. And yet, I don't believe that we have a consensus about the right way to go spending $1 trillion, $1 billion a page in this bill. I think the important thing that we must do for the future is to look at all of the expenditures that we are making. I think it is important for us to take a look at $1 trillion from last year that we spent on stimulation, which did not do anything to help our economy. Now we have another $1 trillion in trying to shore up our financial institutions coming down the pike, and we have $1 trillion in spending before us. We already have a $10.6 trillion debt. So I think it is time to step back and say $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there. We're talking about real money. The great Everett Dirksen used $1 billion, and now we're at $1 trillion for that analogy. So I think it is time to pause, Madam President, and say to the American people, we're going to have a view of what needs to be done before we spend another dollar, much less $1 trillion, that you are sending to the U.S. government. Right now, the bill that is before us is 1/3 tax cuts and 2/3 spending. Now, I believe 100 of us would say that we need a stimulus package. It is how we spend this money that is the disagreement. Even the tax cuts, in my opinion, are not going to help create jobs or keep people in their homes, which should be our major focus. The tax cuts are about the same as we did last year, which every economist agrees that I've heard didn't work, because we didn't see a stimulus, we didn't see buying increase. Instead, the economy continued to go steadily downhill. The payroll tax that is dribbled out in $20 or $30 per paycheck is not going to make people feel that they can have the confidence to spend money, which in turn create the jobs. I believe we should have tax cuts that are targeted to one of two things: either to make people spend their money. We have just had the converter boxes, coupons, that will go to offset the cost of this digital transition. You get a coupon in the mail, and you take it into a dealer that is selling those boxes, and it offsets the cost immediately. How about a tax cut that is in the form of a coupon that can only be redeemed if you spend money in certain areas, such as home improvement, weatherization, where you buy things that create a market, so we won't see retailers or manufacturers having to lay people off the way we have seen in the last few weeks. Why not a coupon for expenditures that will assure that the money is spent for job-creating activities? Why not a tax cut to employers for hiring people. That would be direct. That would say, if you will hire people, we will give you a tax credit, and employers would understand that. That's an incentive. $500 in payroll taxes dribbled out is not going to give that confidence, and we have only the history of last year to show it. Let's talk about the spending. Madam President, I do think we can spend wisely to create jobs. The Republicans are not against spending. We just want to separate spending that is going to create jobs versus spending that people might like, that might be good programs, but are not going to create jobs. And that is the division that we have right now. If we can target the spending, which, let me say, in this new amendment is better than the original bill. They did cut out probably, they said $100 billion, but when you add in the amendments that were already in the bill, it's about a $50 billion cut. And some of what they cut out was the right amount that they should have cut out. It was the right types of projects that they should have cut out. I will give them that. I think if we'd had a more collaborative process from the beginning, we could cut out about $200 billion that would not be creating jobs, and we could put it into the stimulus that would. The kind of stimulus that we should be targeting is money that we're going to have to spend anyway, say over the next 5 years. Let me take, for an example, military construction. In military construction, the Department of Defense has a 5-year plan. We know what the 5-year plan is. So in normal times, we would take 1 year at a time. And the Department of Defense will put its highest priorities in the first year, and then the second year will be next, and third, fourth, and fifth. But if we had a stimulative package, we would take that 5-year plan, which I have an amendment that is already filed to do. We would take the 5-year plan for the Department of Defense, and we would put it into 3 years so that the spending would be up front. It would create jobs in America, and it would be spending that we know we're going to need to do anyway. And that spending would create then the jobs that would be money we were going to spend anyway, so that in the last 2 years, we can start going back to normal if the economy has picked up and people are spending, and we have a lower unemployment rate. Then in the last 2 years, we would be able to start saying, well, we've already done our military construction spending. We don't need to spend that money in those last 2 years, and we can start trying to come toward a balanced budget again. We have got to start whittling down that $10.6 trillion debt, but instead we're going in the opposite direction, adding to that $10.6 trillion debt already on the books. So, Madam President, I think there are some things that we could agree to do. But this bill has not gone through the processes that would allow that input. My amendment has been pending since last week. It has been filed, but no action has been taken on it because we are not allowed to have the action, and we didn't have the action in committee that would have allowed amendments. I believe we could have made some headway on military construction. The same for highway. I agree with the highway spending in this bill. I think we should have more in that direction because it's money that we're going to have to spend eventually. Move it up to the front. It's American jobs. That meets the test. So, Madam President, I am very, very concerned that some of the spending in this bill, in the hundreds of millions and billion-dollar categories, is the kind of spending that is going to increase, it's going to increase payments that people are then going to come to expect, and we are not going to be able to come back to normalization even when we have normalization, and we're going to keep adding to this debt. I hope that my colleagues will pause and realize that for $1 trillion, we ought to do better for the future generations of our country. Because if our foreign investors in the United States debt start beginning to think it is a risk to invest in the United States because they have no means to pay back, two things can happen, and both of them are bad. One is they stop buying the debt, and then what are we going to do? The second is they buy the debt, but at what rate? When they start raising the interest rates because the risk is greater, then we put inflation on top of the economic woes that we are now experiencing. And Madam President, neither of those scenarios is a good one. And I hope that our colleagues will see that we are on a road that in the long term is not the right road for our country. And I respect that everyone is trying to do what is right. I know that my colleagues on the Democratic side are trying to do what they think is right. I know the President is, and I know the Republicans are too. We are in disagreement because we have not had the ability to fully come together in a way that will allow give and take, not just a bill that is laid before us where we are trying to amend here, amend there, without any cohesion in what we want to be the final result. That would be a collaborative process. But what we have done is not. And at $1 trillion, I think we need to do it right. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.